Yo. What's up, guys? I'm Gnarly. Thank you very much to Beats by Girls for having me on the live stream. I'm going to be talking today a little bit about finger drumming, which is, I guess, my speciality. I'm based in London, and I generally use Native Instruments Maschine MK3, which is this device you'll find right here in front of me. I'm gonna maybe play a little set for you guys and then get into a little bit about how I do what I do. So let's kick it off with a little bit of lo-fi and see how that goes. Yes. So that's a little demo of kind of what I do. So I guess I'll let you know a little bit about how I got into finger drumming. I've been producing for maybe about 13 years since I was at school. So I've played piano since I was a little kid. I'm classically trained. And then I kind of wanted to be a rapper in my teens. And that's how I got into making beats. Was I was making beats for myself to rap on, but I realized I wasn't that great at rapping, and I was like really into making beats. So that kind of took over, and I wanted to go from being just a bedroom producer to doing like live performances and stuff. And I'd seen a couple videos and a couple of live shows of people doing finger drumming. So like one of the first finger drummers that I discovered was a guy called Jeremy Ellis, who's one of the like old school OG finger drummers. And I thought I'd give it a go. I basically bought myself a Maschine Mark II, which was the older model to this one, and I just kind of fell in love with it. And finger drumming's been pretty much my life for the last 5 years. You can find me online and stuff, so you should be able to see all my socials and stuff. Just here if you want to give me a follow and stuff, and see more about what I do. You can, the links are right there. Yeah, so I guess I'll get into a little bit of a breakdown about how I construct my kits and stuff. The main kind of thing you've got to consider with finger drumming is because it's live performance. I tend to not use loops that much anymore. It's more about using sample chops. But if I am using loops, the main thing that you got to keep in mind is internal rhythm and, you know, like groove, feeling the beat, which comes from just a lot of practice. It's like learning any other kind of instrument, right? So if you're learning guitar or piano, it's about finger independence and muscle memory. So the way to gain that is just through doing consistent regular practice. So I always recommend doing about 10 minutes a day if you're starting off as a beginner, um, just to get into the flow of things and build up that habit of being able to do things, and build up that muscle memory. For me, like the turning point for me of being able to construct my best routines was when I did a 30-day beat challenge. So something I recommend to everyone starting out is just set yourself, maybe even if 30 days seems a bit overwhelming for you, maybe go for a week where you have to like construct, compose, and record and post a video each day, which will really help you to kind of be able to improve your workflow as well, which is a super important thing. For me with finger drumming, it's much simpler in terms of production because you're thinking about the key parts, right? So you've got your melody, your bass, vocal chops, and then your drums. So those are the four main kind of elements that I have set up. And if I talk to you a little bit more about my pad placement, um, there are loads of different types and styles of finger drumming out there. So if you go out and research a bunch of finger drummers, you'll see that some people play their drums one-handed and trigger all the samples with the other hand. Some people play the style with me, like me, where I kind of split my pads in two. So my right hand will control the right hand side of the pad, so like hi-hats and samples on this side. And then my left hand will be controlling kick, snare, and then samples on this side. So in terms of pad placement, the way I always have my drums set up is kick on pad 1, snare on pad 2. I've got two closed hi-hats, so I'll have pad 3 and pad 4 set up with closed hi-hats, two slightly different sounding ones so that it adds a little bit of a dynamic range in there. Open hi-hats always on pad 8, and I have my crash up here on 13. Now, depending on the routine, sometimes I'll have toms set up here. So you can hear I've got a low, mid, and a high. And then for the rest of the pads, I'll generally have so sample chops set up. So whether that's melodies, bass, vocal chops, it all kind of depends on the routine, really. And also choke groups are super important. So if I go over to the next screen, you should be able to see my Maschine layout now. So I actually use Maschine as a VST in Ableton, and that's my general setup. I prefer doing all the mixing and stuff in Ableton and being able to control that kind of stuff. So for live shows, you have a bit more control over how you're going to sound going out before you even get to the mixing desk. And then using Maschine as the sample engine, just because I really like the streamlined workflow that Native Instruments have got set up. So for choke groups, I always have kind of my hi-hat set up in one choke group. So you'll see if I go to pad mode on my controller, or alternatively in machine, I can actually go here. And you'll see it here. So if you've got a microcontroller, you'll generally have to do this on the software because you don't have the screens to be able to do it on the pad like you can on the Mark III. So you'll find here, these are your choke groups just here. And basically what choke groups do is they allow you to cut off the sounds of each pad. So say if I've got all my hi-hats set up in one choke group, so let me just set that up real quick. If I put all my hi-hats into choke group 1, the benefit of that is it gives you a bit more control. So you can make your drums sound a little bit more realistic. So if I was playing a real drum kit, right, and I'm playing on the hi-hats, if you're playing a closed hi-hat and then an open hi-hat, you wouldn't want that open hi-hat to carry on ringing out when you play the next closed hi-hat. You'd actually want it to cut off the previous sound. So you can hear it here, like I'm basically, instead of having that open hi-hat ringing out, I can cut it off because it's in the same choke group as my closed hi-hats. So you do the same thing with sample chops. So let's take this, for example. I'm just going to duplicate this one over here and extend the sample. So this is the whole sample. All the tracks I was playing earlier, you'll be able to find them on my One Takes Volume 1 beat tape, which is available on all major streaming platforms, Spotify, iTunes, etc. So this track was called Sleepy, and this is the entire sample. So you hear like there's quite a lot of elements in there that you can chop up and stuff. And so the main thing with sampling is selecting your chops, right? So if I take this and I go into my sampling mode on machine, you can either, there's two types of editing. So you've got destructive editing, which is where, say, if you make your chop and you want to truncate it, that's destructive editing, because what I'm essentially doing is I'm making that chop and then I'm deleting all the rest of it. So I won't be able to make minor adjustments in that case if I wanted to. So what I actually prefer to do when I'm doing chops is to do non-destructive editing, which you can do in Zone. So if I go to Zone, I can actually adjust the chop, as you can see. And then it means that even though I've got that chop and it's only going to play that zone, if I later want to change that, I can then move that. So that's kind of generally how I prefer to have it. Obviously, the longer samples you have without truncating them, it's going to use up more CPU. So obviously, it's kind of up to you what you do in that instance. If you've got 16 banks of different chops and you know that's exactly the chop you want to do, then I'd recommend doing destructive editing. So that's when you truncate the sample. So if I just give you a demonstration of it here, so that's now just that chop. It's gotten rid of all the rest of the sample. But if I keep it in Zone, I can then go back and edit that. So I have two kind of different ways of putting together performances. So one will be doing sample chops where it's just one shot hits. Or I will play along to loops. So for example, on this track, this is a whole loop. And I'm not triggering any chops in that one, which allows me to kind of go a bit more crazy on the drums. So you heard on this track, I was able to kind of do like crazy like triplets and drum patterns that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do if I've got to trigger every single chop. But let's say in the chop instance, if I'm just hitting one shot, So again, there's several different ways you can go about this. I prefer to use one-shot hits and then use choke groups to cut off the previous sample. But you can also use the ADSR envelope, so attack, delay, sustain, release, which can give you a bit more expression. But again, if you're using that kind of method, you've got to have your finger pressed down for the whole pad, so it kind of gives you a little bit less room to play with the drums, but maybe a little bit more expression in terms of how the actual sample rings out. So again, that's down to personal preference, but for me, I prefer to use one shot. So I've got all my sample chops from that one loop set up here. So those are all the different parts. So you see that's the first hit, that's the second, third, fourth, and then right at the end. And then I've also, for this routine, got a little vocal kind of loop going on. And my kick is kind of more of a snare rim shot kind of sound on this one. Two close hi-hats and open hat. So what this allows me to do, having the chops, is that I can trigger all the one shots separately. So it allows me to go, you know, the next pad. I've also got this one, which is a similar kind of setup. So again, it's all these chops here, my drums down at the bottom, but then I've also got hi-hats set up on this one just here, which allows me to go. So having those chops kind of gives you a little bit more freedom to play around with tempos in your routine as well, because you don't necessarily have to stay like rigid on time. You can speed things up in some places, slow things down depending on the groove and how you're feeling. Whereas if you're going the other way where you're playing along to loops, you have to be very good at keeping in time and triggering those loops on time, because if you don't, things are going to sound a little bit off, and then it's very difficult to bring it back without it being noticeable. So if you're playing along to loops, you really, really have to practice staying in time. Whereas if you're doing chops, it gives you a bit more freedom to play around with tempos and not worry so much about hitting the loops in time. For my loop setup, so this track is called It's Me, and it's available to download. You can download all the Melodic Loops on my Bandcamp and have a play around with it yourself. So these are loops that I've created myself. So I've got this one main melody line. And that kind of repeats. I've also got this loop, which is like a kind of arpeggiated synth. So I use this on like kind of the fast hi-hat bits because it adds a bit more depth to it. And then I've also got the bass loop, so the bass line will play. So, you know, like if you were playing a routine and you kind of hit them a bit off, like it's going to sound super, super out. So you have to practice getting really good at just hitting all those samples right in time so they play together. Again, I've got all my standard drums, so kick, snare, 2 closed hi-hats, open hat, crash, and I've got some vocal chops in this one, so...
It's me.
Toms.
Go on, girl.
Gnarly music.
That's my producer tag. So I'd recommend, you know, if you don't have a producer tag, definitely get one of those, because If you're doing a live set and you're not really into talking that much, just
Gnarly music.
doing one of those will set everyone off, and they'll know who you are and remember your name. So just having a good producer tag is always a good one. I like to always finish on that kind of
Gnarly music.
keep that in everyone's mind. But yeah, so like if I'm playing along to loops, I kind of try to think of my routines in terms of the same structure as a song, so that you're kind of taking people on a journey rather than it being me playing the same 4-bar loop or 8-bar loop over and over again. Um, Adding a little bit of variation, not only in the kick patterns and stuff, but thinking about the structure of your song is really going to help your routines, especially in a live show, for people to stay interested, right? So if you think about a song, you normally have like the intro, like a build up, then you have like your verse section, I guess, which would be like the first section. You have your hook, which should be like the main climax, like catchy bit that everyone remembers. And then you can maybe do like a little breakdown, and then do like a nice little outro. I tend to use the filter a lot on my perform effects, which kind of adds a bit of a, you can add kind of like a nice tremolo effect, and especially with lo-fi it works really well. But yeah, with the loops I kind of use these vocal chops to add a bit of expression, and I also like to have these kind of woos, like a chant set up, which is a really nice way to transition into your next section in your routine. So if you ever listen to this, so I normally start this one like this, right?
It's me. It's me. It's me. It's me.
Gnarly music.
Go on, girl.
Turn it up.
So you heard how that kind of vocal sample,
Go on, girl.
it was like a nice transition into the next section where I played the drums a little bit faster. Again, like I was saying earlier, having those loops allows me to go a little bit more crazy on the drums, because I've got the freedom to play those 30-second note hi-hats on my hi-hats that I wouldn't be able to do if I was having to trigger other samples as well. So that's kind of why I like to use loops sometimes. Yeah, like I definitely wouldn't be able to do those fast little hi-hats if I was having to trigger other stuff at the same time. So that's something to keep in mind just in terms of sections of a song. Yeah, this is probably one of my favorite routines as well, actually, this It's Me one. So I'd love it if any of you guys want to download the pack and do a little flip, just tag me on Instagram, and I'd love to see kind of what you guys come up with. In terms of like practicing like exercises, for beginners, there's kind of two main exercises I like to recommend. So I'm doing lessons at the moment, one-to-ones on Zoom. So if anyone wants to hit me up about that, I've got a couple spots left for next month. But generally I'll start people depending on their skill level. So if you're a beginner, it's always good to start with straight beats and very slow so that you can build that internal rhythm, because a lot of it's about groove, right? If you think about maybe the original finger drummer, maybe you'd say it's Jay Dilla, and Jay Dilla was very much about unquantized and the feel and the groove, and that's very much translated into finger drumming because like, there's a lot of different ways to learn out there. There's a great app called Melodics where it's kind of grid based and you have the visual cue and you kind of have to play in time with it, a little bit like Guitar Hero. Um, but if you want to get really into especially hip hop, it's very much about syncopated rhythms and uh like maybe you have like one note slightly out, but that adds such a groove to it and like such a human feel, which is the great thing about finger drumming, because if you're programming in all of your beats, it's going to sound super quantized. And even though that might be great for if you were making like house music or EDM, those kind of genres where everything's super in time, super like overproduced and like really clean sounding, that's kind of when you want to have those quantized beats. But if you want to get into hip hop and lo-fi, it's very much about having that human feel and that human element to it. And I think even if you don't want to be like a finger drummer, like performing finger drummer, I think it's really a really great way to kind of play your beats in for your production as well and add that kind of human element rather than just hitting the quantize button all the time. I think it really adds a lot of depth to your routines and your production if you can have that human feel to it. So I'm gonna talk you guys through a couple of basic finger drumming exercises. So if you're playing like a straight beat, I like to think of my hi-hats as like my metronome. So my closed hi-hat, you want to be able to play those like super solid, just straight on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So like I was saying earlier, I play all my hi-hats generally with my right hand, my kick and snare with my left hand. So if you're going with your middle finger on your pad 1, which is your kick, index finger on your left hand, playing pad 2, which is your snare, and then have your index finger on pad 3. So you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare. I think a little choke group going on. Here we go. Kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare. So if you've never done finger drumming before, that's a really great exercise for you to be able to get into how it is to play with your fingers independently. And if you're ready to take it to the next level, what I recommend is doing what I like to call the twiddle. So it's kind of like a DJ term. So like, you know, like on a fader, people be twiddling with their 2 fingers. So you want to think about that in terms of your hi-hats alternating. So pad 3 with your index finger, pad 4 with your middle finger, and you're just alternating those hi-hats. So you'll notice just adding in that 1 extra finger, if you haven't done finger drumming before, it can be like a massive step in gaining that finger independence. So just having those hi-hats alternating and then adding in that same pattern that we were doing earlier. So kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, open hat, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, open hat. So that's a really great exercise just to get into it. Definitely trying to keep an eye on having those 2 fingers alternating all the time and keeping that structure. The way I like to add in my samples, so I generally have samples from pad 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, and 16. Generally, if I'm starting out, I like to start off with a loop, maybe start with 120 BPM, which is just a nice slow rhythm to get used to playing first of all. And then also triggering your crash. So the way that I kind of do that is a kind of C claw where I'll have my thumb triggering the kick and I'll have my middle finger on the crash. And then say if I have my first melodic loop set up, I'll have that on pad 9 and I'll kind of trigger those 3 pads together. So in that kind of claw shape. And then what you want to do after you first trigger that hit is then go straight back down to pad 1 with your middle finger. So it'll go a little something like kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, open hat, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, open hat, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, open hat. So that's a really great basic exercise just as a first step. The next step would obviously be then to try playing syncopated rhythms. If you don't know what syncopation is, it's basically playing something on the offbeat. So if one is your on-beat, the and would be on your off. So a really basic kind of kick pattern with that would be. So you heard on that third kick note that I played, it was on the and, which is offbeat. So that's the syncopated note. So what I always recommend before you get into doing the twiddle with any routine is just to play the single hi-hat with your index finger on pad 3. Again, your kick, middle finger, and snare with your index finger on your left hand. And then you're going kick, snare, kick, kick, snare. 1 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 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 and. So just keeping in mind that pad 3 is keeping your metronome. So that's like your internal metronome, just keeping you in time. And once you're confident with that, take it on to the next level where you're bringing in that twiddle and you're alternating your hi-hats, so pad 3 and pad 4, and doing the same pattern again and just drilling that. So going. So that's just playing quarter note hi-hats. So you want to basically start off with that to get used to getting that muscle memory with your finger independence. And once you're very confident with that, you can then try playing it with double time hi-hats. So doing exactly those same patterns, but then playing the hi-hats double time. So again, what I always recommend before trying it with the twiddle is just doing it on the pad 3 on its own and going. So this is with the syncopated rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 also trying that with that straight beat that we did earlier as well. So go in kick, kick, snare. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So once you get those kind of down with just that single hi-hat, you can then look at adding in that twiddle again. So this is where the finger independence comes in, and you're going kick, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare. You can bring in that crash as well. And also trying that same twiddle technique with the double time hi-hats with the syncopated beat as well. So go in. Kick, snare, kick, kick, snare. Oftentimes when you're starting out, you might feel your hands kind of seizing up a bit. And what I always recommend is just, letting it go real nice and loose, shaking it all out. Make sure your wrists are all nice and flexible. Shake your fingers out, shake your wrists out. And then, like do a couple of hand stretches. Not too long because you don't want to damage your hands, but just get them nice and loose and get the blood kind of moving to your fingers again, and then try it again, and then hopefully that should sort out any kind of hand stiffness. But yeah, those are kind of my main beginner techniques for sure, and they are definitely going to get you up to speed with getting that finger independence and muscle memory. So it's just making sure you practice consistently with this kind of stuff, because it's the same as if you were learning piano. Like I used to have a piano teacher who'd make me do like a diary every day. So I used to have to write down like, today I practiced 30 minutes and stuff. And I think that's a really good way for you to build a habit, is just making sure you're doing something every day. That's kind of it from me in terms of the workshop. I'm gonna just check with the Beats by Girls team and see if we've got any questions coming in. And then hopefully I can kind of answer a couple of those. So let's see. So you got, how do you keep consistent hi-hats? I always pause between every other beat with snares and kicks for my hats. I struggle to just hold straight hats while drumming kicks and hats. So it was like I was saying, it's just keeping those hi-hats constantly alternating as if they're your metronome. So before even attempting to do the alternating hi-hats, I'd always recommend just having just that one hi-hat and being able to play it super solid. So if you're not great at keeping in time, definitely put a click on. Start off slow and build up the speed progressively as you develop, because you don't want to rush in there and then make mistakes and then keep going with that, because that's a really bad way to build up your kind of muscle memory. You want to be really solid, because if you're doing a live show and you mess up, there's nowhere to hide really. So just practicing every single day and being consistent and just keeping those hi-hats like your metronome, and then you can build in the kick and the snare. So that exercise that I showed you earlier of going kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, that's going to really help you just keeping those hi-hats super solid. So what's another question? How do you source your samples? It kind of varies. I was using Splice a lot of the time. So there's a few subscription-based services out there with like huge sample libraries. So Native Instruments have got one which is sounds.com, which is very similar to Splice. I actually personally prefer using Splice because I find the user interface a little bit more easy to use. You get your desktop app, and then it kind of saves everything so that you can find it very easily, and searching on the website is also super handy. You can search by instrument, genre, BPM, like the kind of type of sound you want to go for. They've got like probably millions, if not thousands, of samples on there. There's also like a bunch of other sites. So I know Tracklib does it as well. There's Loop Masters. A lot of producers are creating their own sample packs, which some of them are great as well to find. So if you've got, like some of your favorite producers have probably got packs out there as well. So it's always good to kind of have a look and see what you can find out there. The thing with sampling is you got to be careful, right? Because there's obviously copyright issues and stuff involved. So if you're using something like Splice, it's all royalty free mostly. Whereas if you were ripping a tune off YouTube or like maybe even a vinyl, you might encounter copyright issues, which maybe might not be as much of an issue if you're only posting on socials. But if you were trying to release on Spotify, etc., you're going to run into a lot of problems there. So I tend to keep my samples royalty free if I'm going to be releasing them. I also tend to kind of make my own samples every now and again as well, which is, I think, a great way to improve your creativity. But yeah, there's a lot of different options out there. So Splice is probably my go-to. I haven't used it in a while actually, because you kind of buy monthly credits, like you pay X amount for a month and then you get 100 credits. So that's 100 samples you can download. And I think after a while you end up with like loads of them. And I probably only have like 2 kicks that I like to use anyway. So what's the next? How do you get a producer tag? So you can go on things like Fiverr and people make you them. I know Knox Squared, so he's kind of a YouTuber and Instagram guy. He creates producer tags for people, so I know his son kind of does a lot of them. But I created my own, so I just got someone to say gnarly music, and then I pitched it down, put a bit of reverb, bit of delay on it, and there you go. That's a producer tag. So it's super simple to make one, but obviously if you don't have the means to do that, there's plenty of people out there who can do that for you. Do you create and edit all your samples in Maschine or Ableton? So if I'm creating samples, so if I'm making something from scratch, I will generally do all of that in Ableton. Just because that's my draw of choice. I find you've got a lot more flexibility, like things just work a little bit better for me in Ableton rather than trying to do that in Maschine. You can, of course, do that in Maschine, but I find it's better as a sampler and a groove box than it is using it to do things like mixing and recording and stuff like that. So let's go with the next question. Sorry, just on that last one as well, editing samples. So like I was saying, I create samples. If I'm creating them, I'll create them in Ableton. But then to edit them, I'll generally put them in Maschine, because I find the sample engine is really, like, the workflow is super streamlined, very intuitive and easy to use. So I prefer to edit my samples in Maschine. And say if I'm using a lot of effects processing, I will generally bounce out that audio and then bring it back in, so that I'm not having to have those effects on any of my pads when I'm playing live, because that tends to use up a lot of CPU and you can run into issues with like glitching, or like your MacBook dying because it's taking up too much power. Cool. So the next question: how long did you practice before you felt comfortable performing it in public and or posting videos online? So I've been doing this for about 5 years now. In my first year of finger drumming, it was definitely like a learning curve for me. Looking back on the videos now, I think after a year, I thought I was really good, but looking back at it now, like, it was all right. It was decent. I started getting asked to do my first show kind of 1.5 to 2 years into when I started finger drumming. So that was when I was like solid and decent enough to start doing live shows. I mean, like, in terms of when I felt like I'm like a pro, I'd probably say that's only in the last year. So like in the last year, I've been like really consistent with it over the last 5 years. I practice nearly every day. I've been doing a lot of live shows and sessions and collabs and stuff. And in the last year, I kind of been able to feel a bit more like it's second nature. Like, instead of me having to think about what my fingers are doing and what the pattern is, like, I can feel it. Like, it kind of just translates. Like, my brain is just going, like, I'm not thinking in my head, I'm just feeling the beat and it kind of comes out. And like, I can do snare rolls and stuff now, and like fills, which I could never do before. And it was always a bit mind-boggling, and those 30-second note hi-hats as well. So it's definitely in the last year that I felt super confident with it and like able to teach other people. It's definitely a long game, in the same way that learning an instrument is. You can't expect to be good overnight, or like even in just a year. It takes a lot of practice and dedication to get good at something like that. cool. Next question. So, oh, sorry. On the last one as well, posting videos. I actually started posting videos in the beginning because I Instagram for me was like a practice log. Like I was just posting videos of me practicing. And I guess I started getting good at some point, and then people started following me and stuff. So it kind of just grew from there, like organically. But I was always posting from the very beginning just because I wanted to be able to see my progress. So I see that you're involved with a collective called Secret Sauce Beats. Tell us more about that and anything cool you all are doing. Cool. So Secret Sauce Beats basically came from I like at the very beginning of lockdown, I realized that a whole bunch of my shows had got cancelled, and I didn't really know what I was going to do because I'd actually just quit my job 6 months earlier so that I could start doing music full time and start doing shows, because last year I was working a part-time job 4 days a week, and then trying to fit in finger drumming around that. Basically, I didn't have a day off for a good year. So I quit my job, and then I was like, yeah, this show's going to be amazing. I'm going to do loads of live shows, blah, blah, blah. And then coronavirus hit. And I think it made the world kind of go on pause. And that's, it's not just for me. I understand that's for a lot of people, majority of us, to be fair. And just before lockdown happened in the UK, I'd invited a bunch of my beatmaking friends round for like a finger drumming jam at my place. So if you go on my YouTube, you should be able to find that. And it was basically like 10 of us with all pad controllers, so MPCs, MPDs, machiners, SB404s, etc. And we were all kind of jamming, and it was epic. Like it was really cool, and I was planning to do that as a monthly thing. And then that was no longer possible. So I kind of came up with this idea of doing a beat battle on my Instagram, and I was kind of trying out a few different streaming services. I didn't really know much about streaming before everything happened, and yeah, like I just wanted to kind of connect the community because I realized a lot of us were stuck at home with not much to do, and I thought it'd be a really nice way to engage in the community and like give back. So we were doing these kind of beat battles on my Instagram, on Facebook Live, and at the end of that, I kind of invited a lot of the people who entered and like a bunch of my friends to do an online hangout. And that was really cool, and I realized I wanted to kind of make this permanent thing. So I got in touch with my two good friends, Ono de French and Temple Beats, and we kind of teamed up together to create Secret Sauce, which has kind of grown into more of a community. We've got a bunch of other beat makers who are on the team as well now, and we're hosting these monthly jams where we get like 20 beat makers in a session, like in a Zoom call. Everyone shares their beats, and we kind of give feedback, ask questions and stuff, which is really cool. And we're planning to do a beat battle season. So the submissions are open if you want to enter. We're not looking for finger drummers specifically. If you're a live performing beat maker, so whether that's on keys, you play like drum pad or SP404, anything like that, if you perform live with your beats, go to www.secretsourcebeats.com and send us a 1-minute video. And you can be in our battles from September. So the deadline's open until the 1st of September, and then we'll be starting the season of battlers. It's kind of just a community-based project where we're just looking to connect everyone and like have a good time sharing beats, basically. So yeah, if you want to get involved in that, we'd love to have you. We're always looking for new, fresh talent to get involved. So let's see, second to last question. So can you give a few tools on how to get started with fills? So fills are pretty tricky. I wouldn't recommend trying them out until you are at like a solid advanced level, just because it's quite a tricky technique, and it definitely comes with more about that kind of internal groove and feeling. But what I'd recommend for sure is starting off with just your snares. So snares and kicks. So the way I kind of started with doing it was trying out paradiddles. So paradiddles are a drum exercise that you'll generally get on drums. So when you'll see it is, like marching band drummers. So when you see drummers just playing on a snare pad or whatever, it's in those it's basically training your brain to have that finger independence. So it's alternating your two fingers in patterns. So a very basic one to try out is doing left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right. So if we just do it with the left hand, it's going left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right. And then if you bring in your right hand doing the same, so left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right. So So being able to do that really quickly and then basically inverting it and then converging it. So you go left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, outside, in, inside, out. So just kind of practicing those paradiddles will basically trick your brain into being able to understand your finger independence and you not having to think about it so much. And then once you've got those down, you can kind of translate that onto your actual drum sound so that it sounds a bit more cohesive rather than you just doing an exercise. So paradiddles are definitely the way to go with that. If you go on YouTube or anything like that, you can definitely find like a whole bunch of paradiddle exercises and just translate them to your fingers rather than it being on sticks. So whether it's left, left, right, left, you can do that with your two fingers. So left, left, right, left. So you want to be able to do that kind of thing really quickly, and then that's going to help you be able to do fills and stuff. So here we go. Is the last question for today. What opportunities has finger drumming given you? What doors has it opened for you? It's opened a lot. It's been kind of life-changing for me, to be honest. Obviously, I like I said earlier, I've been producing for 13 years since I was at school, and I kind of never really got anywhere with just the production. It was kind of figuring out what I wanted to do with it as well. Like there was like a whole bunch of different stuff I tried. Like I wanted to make beats for rappers, and then I wanted to be a live sound engineer. I wanted to be a recording engineer. I wanted to be a mix and mastering engineer. And then I wanted to be a singer-songwriter, I wanted to be a rapper, and I had like all these different kind of ideas of what I wanted to do. And then I found finger drumming as a way for me to like humanize my beats, improve my drum patterns, and then also perform live. And obviously, like I started posting all that stuff on Instagram, and like 90% of my work probably comes through Instagram. So having that social media element is definitely really important, especially if you're like an online producer. Um, like never underestimate the power of social media. Like you can get a lot of work for it. Like I've got a lot of gigs, being able to work with different companies and stuff. And like testing out software and testing out hardware and stuff. It's been really amazing, really life-changing for me doing finger drumming. It's also like quite meditative for me. If you got like anxiety or depression, like finger drumming is a really good way for you to get out of your head and like just focus on what you're doing in the here and now. Um, like I was saying, like before coronavirus hit, I was going to be doing like a bunch of gigs this year, and those have all been postponed, but I'm still going to be able to do those like later in the year and next year. So like 2018 I think was the first time I got to do a gig. So I've had to do like a whole bunch of free shows, free live streams, free whatever. Like that's part of life really. You've got to make those connections, and like even if you've got a really small gig where there's only 5 people turned up, you never know who one of those 5 people are going to be. So I always recommend doing those small gigs just to get the experience and make connections and network and stuff. And then that after you've been in the scene for long enough, especially the music industry scene, you kind of realize that everyone knows each other in some way or another. And making those connections has been the most important thing in terms of opening doors, because obviously working hard is really important, and like mastering your craft and putting out consistent content, people can see that you're working hard on it, and that makes you more likely to get booked. So, like staying consistent and working hard and making those connections, networking, those have all contributed towards me being able to become like a professional finger drummer, which is something that I never imagined 5 years ago, but here I am, and this is what I do, and it's super cool, and I really love it. And, like, thank you to everyone that has been following me, liking my stuff, and, like, I wouldn't be able to do this without all the fans out there who've been following me on socials, and like, like even getting those messages and comments of encouragement have like, like really given me the confidence to be able to carry on doing what I do. So if you want to be a finger drummer, like, it's possible, you can do it. I think that's it for today. So that's all questions, and I hope you guys learned something useful from me. Much love to you guys, and thanks again. Big shout out to all the Beats by Girls team who put this together. They've got a really amazing summer lineup lined up for you, so make sure you tune in every week. I've been Gnarly. Peace.